Hello all and welcome to this first podcast for Year 10. So firstly, let's look at what an urban area is, shall we? An urban area is a built-up area such as a town or a city. So to understand what urbanisation is, you have to first know what an urban area is. So yes, Nicosia or Girna or London or Paris or Tokyo, they're all urban areas, towns or cities. Urbanisation is a process where increasing proportion of people or the increasing proportion of the population live in towns and or cities. In other words, there's a reduction of people living in rural areas. Now, rural areas are not towns and cities, it's the opposite. So countryside, farmland, areas that tend to be not towns and cities. Okay. Now, in terms of urbanisation, it's a process that is increasing over the world. So more people are living in towns and cities. Now, rapid urbanisation, where this is happening quickly, is happening more in NEEs or MICs. They are the same thing. So an NEE is a newly emerging economy, and an MIC is a middle income country. They're the same thing. And it's happening quicker here. The world's population is increasing, but it's not increasing evenly. It's increasing more in the southern hemisphere. It used to increase more in the northern hemisphere. But cities like Tokyo, Jakarta, Seoul, Delhi, Shanghai, Manila, they're all increasing very, very quickly. Now, there's reasons for this in terms of birth rates, but also because of migration. So the three reasons why it's happening is, number one, rural to urban migration. Rural-urban migration is people moving from rural areas to urban areas, from the countryside to towns and cities. Normally it's for jobs, but also for access to healthcare and education. There's also an increase in birth rate, so people having more children. Don't forget, birth rate is the number of live births per 1,000 people per year, and people have more children to help with this. And there's also been a decrease in death rate. Death rate has reduced because of better medical care, improved sanitation, and also better water access means people live longer. Now, the birth rate minus the death rate is whether the population goes up or down. And if the birth rate's higher, there'll be a natural increase. Natural increase is more births than deaths. Migration is not to do with natural increase. And that was our first lesson on urbanisation. Then, what we looked at was megacities. Now, a megacity is a population with more than 10 million people. That's it. So examples, New York, Shanghai, London, Mumbai, Tokyo, they all have different characteristics. Some are in HICs, some are in MICs. Now, it's not enough to just say that urban areas like megacities are different to rural areas. Urban areas differ in many different ways. For example, the amount of people, the population densities, the different types of services, the amounts of services. Whereas rural areas are more agriculture. Obviously, businesses tend to set up in the urban areas because there's more trade. In the last 10 years, it has changed. More and more cities are happening, and more urbanisation is happening in LICs and NEEs because of development and a country becoming more developed. Now, in terms of what we looked at in the third lesson about how megacities keep growing, now we looked at what is on the screen right now. Different reasons why people move to cities and kind of what happens as a result. So there are push and pull factors. There are things making people go to urban areas because rural areas haven't got certain things. And there are things like pull factors that entice people to an area. So a pull factor is something that wants to make you go to an area. A push factor is something that makes you want to leave an area. This happens both ways, by the way. Urban to rural, but also rural to urban. We'll come on to later. Now, you have some reasons here that you can see on the screen as to why someone would want to move to an urban area and why they might want to leave. Might want to move to an urban area or leave a rural one. But also, they have different reasons as well. So high costs in shops, more hospitals, more police, higher house prices, more tourists, traffic congestion. So it's not all positives, okay? In megacities and big cities and towns and cities, you have more facilities, better education, more jobs. But then you also get higher rent costs. Then you also get increased wages. So it is a pros and cons and a balanced argument. So it's whether there's more benefits than problems to this certain movement. We then looked at global trends. So we looked at counter-urbanisation. This is the shift where people move from urban to rural areas. So the opposite of urbanisation. People might want to go to the rural areas for more space, for cleaner air, for less congestion, for less pollution. And then you have suburbanisation. So not people moving out of the cities to the rural areas, but instead suburbanisation is the population shift from city centres to the outskirts of the city. They move to the rural areas, but in doing so, they expand the city. So something called urban sprawl. Urban sprawl is where the city gets bigger and spreads out, and that's what happens here. So the edge of the city becomes bigger, almost like a fried egg increasing in size. And what you have on the edge of the cities is lower population density, more green spaces than the urban core. And this has happened, again, changed over time, depending on where you are in the world. So again, in HICs, this has happened more so because of transport options. People can live in the suburbs and transport into work on good train or bus or commuter settlement routes. Now, urbanisation rates differ across the world due to varying economic development levels. Low-income countries experience faster growth than developed nations because the rapid rural-urban migration has driven this. Most people move for jobs, better living standards, but also try to escape the hardship and unemployment of rural areas and what that has to offer. So you then watch that TED talk, and I broke down some exam questions for you. Before we looked at the rising population. Population is increasing all over the world right now. In some countries it's coming down, in some countries it's increasing fast, and in some places it's increasing slowly. We then looked at the demographic transition model, the DTM, where stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 varies depending on where you are. And if you're at stage 1, you are a poor country, you have a high birth and a high death rate. Different reasons for this: low contraception in terms of high birth rate, but also low quality of healthcare or healthcare accessibility, so therefore high death rate. Population is quite low because there's a lot of births but a lot of deaths. Then as you develop, your population number goes up because death rate comes down, and then as you get into more developed countries, the birth rate starts to fall. Women prioritise careers, more contraception, etc. So as you can see on the screen now, feel free to pause. You have the demographic transition model. This is what it looks like, going from stage 1 to 5. Different examples of countries you can find online. But the more developed you are as a country, the higher up the order you go. And the next thing is the Burgess model you can see on the screen now. The Burgess model is basically how a city's land is used. We're looking at land use zoning later, but ultimately in the middle you have the core, the inner city, the CBD, the central business district. Then you have the inner ring around the outside, the inner city. You have the suburban areas on the outside. Then you have the urban fringe, where urban meets rural. So that's what the urban-rural area would look like in terms of the movement from one to the other. And then this week we looked at the problems of rapid urbanisation. So we looked at settlement hierarchies, division of different types of settlement usually by population size, smaller being in the countryside, larger being in the urban areas. In other words, more people live in the cities. Then we looked at spheres of influence. So spheres of influence are defined as the area served by particular settlements. Larger the settlement, larger sphere of influence. We looked at threshold population, the minimum number of people needed to support a settlement or service. The range is the maximum distance that people are willing to travel in order to obtain a particular service. Then we looked at higher or lower order services and goods. So high order services / goods have a high threshold population, normally like TVs and financial services, and then low order services / goods are like newspapers, bread and stuff. You don't travel too far for those. And then we looked at the problems and categorised them into environmental quality, crime, health, sanitation, transport, housing, congestion, education and employment. All these 9 different problems associated with rapid urbanisation are more prevalent in LICs and NEE / MICs. And then we looked at land use. So how we use the land. Land use is basically how we use the land. For example, whether it be for buildings, or whether it be for farmland or whatever it may be. There's numerous factors with this. So economic activities, transport accessibility, land value, population density, planning regulations, historical development, environmental factors and social factors. All these things dictate how we use the land. More expensive areas obviously are used differently. Higher land values tend to be more intensive. It's like skyscrapers and stuff. But environmental, like parks and rivers and stuff, might be areas you want to avoid in terms of flooding. And that was nearly the last bit before we looked at some questions, an exam practice, and 8 markers. So don't forget 8 mark questions, definitely. And I'll take your exam questions. I would use the essay structure, intro, like 2 sentences where you include your opinion and your examples, and then peel, 3 peels. I would say the 1-1-3-1 structure. So 1 sentence for your point, 1 sentence for your evidence, 3 for your explanation, and 1 for your link. And then a conclusion at the end, 1 or 2 sentences just concluding your overall points. Easy peasy.